things I absolutely love about your story is it's a typical startup story, right? Founded in a garage, a couple of childhood friends, you and, is it Andrew Barnes, your mate?
That's right.
How old were you when you guys got to know each other?
Look, we've been best mates since high school. So for myself and Andrew and Chris, who was actually the year below us in high school, we started our first business in grade 11. So we would go up and down the main street in the suburb where we were and sell websites to local companies. We didn't really know what we were doing, but I think that's really where we kind of learnt our craft.
You know what, I reckon there's a lot of people that still sell websites to local companies that don't know what they're doing. So, you know, I think you were probably well ahead of the game. And so on your website, it's very humble the way that you describe your journey. You mentioned the fact that you just did a last-minute application to Y Combinator and got through, right? But tell us the real story. What does that look like as a young founder applying to one of the leading accelerators in the Valley? How did that come about?
So to give you a bit of context, so we were a part of YC's Summer 15 batch. So it was a good 4 or 5 years ago now. Mm-hmm. To be honest with you, and I mean this with all sincerity, I didn't actually know what Y Combinator was when we applied.
I mean, you were going to be a doctor. How could you?
Yeah, that's right. Well, so Andrew actually sent me an application at 10 o'clock in the morning. It was due 2 hours later. Mm-hmm. And we just had to fill it out and kind of roll the dice. And I think one of the key things that really taught me is, you know, you've got to really be in it to win it. I know it's a bit of a cliche, but unless we actually gave it a go and kind of, you know, put ourselves out there, I wouldn't be on this stage talking to you today, I don't think.
So it's really just about like having the guts to back yourself. And so when you actually got there and you were starting to create your business, would you actually kind of credit the Y Combinator program with, you know, contributing to GoOne's business model as it stands, or did you guys already have it all figured out?
I get asked this a lot. As a YC alumni, as a company that kind of was born out of Y Combinator, one of the most common things I get asked is kind of, you know, what's the secret sauce? What is it that comes out that makes, you know, Dropbox and Airbnb and Stripe and these sorts of companies come out of YC? The thing I'm going to tell you, and this is probably not that big a secret, but there aren't any special programs or anything that they do in there. What I think the biggest value that I think YC does is it actually makes us kind of have a higher bar. I do remember meeting the fellow sort of cohorts and members of our batch in YC 2015 in summer. And I was sitting there going, why are we here? We don't belong. You know, these guys are brilliant people and they're in here with us. And what that did was that made us work bloody hard.
Sure.
But I think the second part of it was the mentors that they give you access to, you know, the likes of someone from like Peter Thiel. We had half an hour with Peter Thiel to say, hey, this is what we're doing.
That's a good day.
Yeah. I think it also just made us go, okay, we've actually got something here that people believe in. And I think that validation that YC provides is actually incredibly important as well.
And I think like that global reach and the global mindset is so important. That's something we do at the Hacker Exchange is we try to make sure that we give young founders a global experience from day one. You now have 7 international offices and over 100 staff. You're barely 4 or 5 years old. So tell me a little bit about that growth piece. I mean, Chief Growth Officer, it's a great title. How do you do the growth?
I think if you ever come across anyone who's got the title Chief Growth Officer, dig into what they do. Because
what I'm trying to do.
Yeah. One of the things that you'll find is I pretty much do everything and nothing. As a founder, if we've got founders in this room, you will find you are a catch-all. And if you're one of several founders, you'll probably end up as a CGO at some stage. For us, growth is really about customer acquisition. So that's everything from product-related sort of roles of going, how are we going to create a product that is going to be more appealing to the customer and allow us to expand into more markets, through to sales and marketing. And growing into new markets is incredibly difficult. I don't think I've ever come across a company that kind of just struck oil from the start. It's really hard.
And so that's a really good point about whether we might have some founders in the room. Can I get a hands up if you've actually founded something or you're an entrepreneur in your own right? Straight up. There we go.
Awesome.
Okay, lots of people building some new things for us. And do we have any actual customers of GoOne in the room? I'm curious. Anyone that's used the GoOne platform? Hey, we've got some mates out there.
Hey.
And everybody else, I'm assuming you're potential customers of GoOne. So that's great. So can you give me a little bit of more detail about scaling into international markets? What thought process do you go through as you're sort of deciding whether that's the right market to enter or that one, or, you know?
So this is where having people who have been there, done that, is a really valuable asset to lean on. So in our circumstance, we actually chose, even though we're a YC company, we actually chose to come back to Australia, set up here in Australia and grow from Australia. because one of our firm beliefs is there's no reason why we can't run, a world-class company from Brisbane in Queensland or here in Australia. So from our point of view, we wanted to make sure that we set up our foundations here in Australia first. We've got a friendly market. We know the market. We knew it really, really well. But as we decided to go overseas, it was really important for us to look to other people who'd been there and get their advice. So being able to speak to people in the Valley, like I know there's Stelly, who is the founder of Close.io, which is a very well-known CRM. His first bit of advice was, don't come to the US, stay in Australia, but sell into the US. And I was like, what do you mean? We've got these plans to hire all these salespeople to ramp up and do all this stuff. And he said, no, what you should do is sell from the mothership. And we took that advice on board. And so what we did was we hired 3 or 4 salespeople who did a graveyard shift, sold into the US. We learnt really, really quickly. We were able to reiterate on changes to product, changes to our strategy on the fly there in the office, there from our Brisbane office. And then once we got traction and once we got customers in the US, we started a landing party. We transplanted those guys who were doing graveyard shifts into the US, and then we've opened up 2 offices there. So we've got one in Palo Alto, one in Salt Lake City. And we've got about 50 to 60 staff there in the US today.
That's fantastic. I really like that concept, selling from the mothership, and I think it's a really nice change of pace for a lot of us who just get told straight up we need to transplant our businesses overseas just to get growth and access to those markets. So that's a really fascinating approach. Now, let's talk about product. You talked about the fact that you want to make sure that the product's the right fit. You've been described as the Netflix for training, which sounds kind of sexy. Is that kind of like where you're going for? Or talk us through the product and the features.
I mean, typical startup speak, right? I am the Uber of, the Netflix of, the Spotify of. But so kind of a real cliche that we are the Netflix of learning or Spotify of learning. The best way to be able to describe to you what we do is let's look at some parallels of how we consume content in our day-to-day lives. So I've got people in my staff who have never purchased a CD before. Because back in the day, you'd go to an HMV or a Sanity Music and you'd purchase a CD. Then you had marketplaces which emerged, like iTunes, where you would be able to go onto iTunes and purchase any song you wanted. And then you end up with something like an aggregator, such as Spotify. TV shows, movies, you'd go and hire a DVD or hire a video. Then you started subscribing to something like Netflix. So what we do is we see that the content we're starting to consume in our day-to-day lives has gone from being able to buy a la carte to become subscription models. Because with the digitization of content, we're seeing that with everything, as I mentioned, from TV shows and movies through to songs to even books now with Kindle Unlimited. So for us at Go One, it's really simple. We allow customers to get a subscription to thousands of courses for a single cost per employee. One of our earliest customers a few years ago was Foxtel. And that Netflix...
So they understood the model then, straight up.
Yeah, ironically. But one of the really interesting parts of it was when they signed up, we had about 200 courses in our Netflix for Learning. Fast forward 3 years later, we've now got over 60,000 courses. But guess how much extra Foxtel is paying? Nothing. Wow. Because when Netflix adds a new TV show, how much extra do you pay?
Yeah, that's true. I mean, we just wait for it to drop every month, right? Everyone's checking out the lists, what's coming up next.
Exactly. So from our point of view, it's that idea of being able to perpetually provide customers with more value the longer they stay with us. And
we were talking about this before, and I think something that's really interesting about the employee experience when they do learning is that, I don't know, if you're slightly older, maybe we look older. We are actually older than we look because hashtag Asian joke. But essentially, you used to go to work and the cool tech was at the office. Like you'd have the best laptops, you'd have a great new phone, maybe it was a BlackBerry, oh my God. And now the cool tech is at home and the experiences that we expect are coming out of, all of the home tech and the IoT. And this is now translating into the workplace. What other trends are you seeing in employee engagement?
I think it's really important to understand, and I think you've hit the nail on the head there. When we look at the role that, say, training or learning plays in the workplace, it used to be a compliance or a tick and flick tool. Today, it's actually a retention tool. People are staying in workplaces because they can see opportunities to learn and progress their careers. If I can give you a bit of a far-out analogy there, let's think of high performance, okay? So we've got a lot of people in this room who will either own a company or work in a company where they expect high performance of themselves. So it's a really difficult thing to achieve high performance and maintain it. But one of the analogies I'm going to give you is let's think about another sort of area where high performance is incredibly important, and that's with athletes. So Usain Bolt, when he was racing back in the day.
Pretty high performer.
That's right, pretty high performance. But in a given month, he might run 4 races at 10 seconds each. He's got to be at high performance for 40 seconds in a month. What's he doing for the other, 29 days, 23 hours, 3,600 seconds, or minus 40?
The rest of the time?
The rest of the time. What he ends up doing is he focuses on 2 things: recovery and training. And as founders and as workers, the 2 things that we probably neglect the most is focusing on training, upskilling ourselves, getting better at what we do. And the second part of it is recovery, our own sort of personal well-being, our own sort of mental and physical well-being as well. So from my perspective, being able to focus on those 2 things on employees and on teams is the way that we actually help achieve high-performing teams. So to go back to your question of going, what are we seeing changing in the workplace and sort of the influence of our personal lives influencing it, it's actually that focus on upskilling and that focus on looking after ourselves. And that's where training plays a really key role.
And so do you think then it's the responsibility of not just the corporates and employers, but also the founders like yourself to actually create and promote that content that leads people to spend more time on the recovery and the mental health?
100%. So when you mentioned before, my background in another world is actually as a general practitioner. I'm a GP. So, last night I spent a few hours in clinic working with my patients. And one of the key things that I see every single day is increasing rates of anxiety, depression, mental health issues, not to mention comorbid issues like diabetes, blood pressure, and those sorts of lifestyle problems. And so one of the best things that I can do for my teams and the people I work with is to make them happier, healthier people, whether that be in general practice or whether that be in Go One. And where my worlds come together, if I can share a stat with you, every 1.3 seconds, someone in the world is doing a course on Go One.
Every 1.3 seconds?
Every 1.3 seconds. So in the
That's
time...
That's a good stat.
Yeah.
How did you find that one out?
I forgot to tell you that one. But
that's a good stat.
But in the time we'll be sitting here, we'll probably have 1,000 to 2,000 people do training.
Really?
That's the sort of reach that we've got, and that's the sort of reach we're growing. And where my 2 worlds come together is that last year we rolled out domestic violence awareness training to 250,000 people in the Queensland government.
That's incredible.
That's where my worlds come together, and that's where learning starts to make a real difference to society and workplaces as well.
Yeah, and I really love the fact that, you're starting to reimagine what professional development learning can look like, and it really goes beyond just upskilling on the next software or that compliance training that you have to do. I think that's such a really interesting mission that you and your team are on. And I think, I probably speak for many people in the audience, like my family's had mental health touch it, which is, really hard and stressful. So I think just on behalf of people that have that, thank you for focusing on that for the workplace.
I think it's going to be one of the most important topics you will see over the next 20 years in the workplace.
Now, tell me a little bit about sort of the way you nurture and attract your talent, because as we mentioned before, your team has grown exponentially, you've got staff everywhere, and you're focusing on helping others manage their employee engagement. What are some of the secret sauce bits that Go One does internally? Give us a peek behind the curtain.
Well, we're still trying to figure that out. We've gone in 3 years from having a dozen staff to now over 200 staff globally. And as you grow, anyone here who is growing or has raised money and is looking to grow, talent is the biggest challenge that we face. Talent's the biggest problem we face, particularly in Australia, because we're quite isolated. But we also don't have as many people who have been there and done that. So for us, it's twofold. One is it's really important that we find great talent. The second part of it is that we need to retain and grow it. And it's coincidental because that's what we help people do as well, as you mentioned. I think one of the first things that it comes back to is actually how we hire people. Very often you get asked, you hear people talk about hiring for cultural fit. And one of the things that I was introduced to really early on was actually the concept of not hiring for cultural fit, but cultural contribution. I always tell my staff that the company we are today cannot be the same company we are tomorrow. So therefore, when we bring people on board, I want to find people who can contribute to our culture and grow it, and not necessarily create a bit of a monoculture, which you often see occur, particularly in startups that are started by best mates like ours, right? So for me, at the end of the day, it's actually trying to challenge almost what our instinct tells us to do, and actually go, what's going to enhance what we do? So I think it starts with the hiring. And then when it comes to retention, I think it's, and we don't get it right a lot of the time. I'll definitely put my hand up and say that. I think it's our ability, I think it's about just trying to listen to staff. Now, there are so many different ways you can do that, but if you don't have your ear to the ground, or in my case, finger on the pulse, you're not really going to understand what changes need to occur, and sometimes they occur too slowly, and you run into problems.
I think that reminds me of a quote I heard. I think on day one, somebody said, every time you make a hire, you're either increasing your diversity or decreasing it. And I think that concept of cultural enhancement and cultural contribution is something we can definitely take away as we grow all of our teams. Now, I'm going to ask you a little bit about role modeling. I mean, you guys were a garage startup. You've gone global. You're, $30 million raised from Microsoft. I mean, that's pretty special, partly from Microsoft.
Yeah, we're very lucky.
Yeah, and just a little good. Tell me about the importance in your mind about just role modeling leadership to the up-and-coming talent and the people coming through the ranks. How do you see your personal contribution to that and also GoOne's contribution?
So I think the first thing for me is I mentioned that talent is one of the biggest challenges a company like ours, a company that's bigger than ours or smaller than ours will face. So we've got a vested interest in growing this ecosystem, in actually seeing other startups grow and thrive, because the more companies there are that are like us, bigger than us or smaller than us, the more ecosystem grows and the more talent actually gets created or nurtured. So we've actually got a bit of a selfish agenda there in that we want to see this grow because we want talent as well. Mm-hmm. But when it comes to kind of how we contribute back to it, the best thing that GoOne could do is to become the biggest and most successful company we can be. I know that sounds very selfish, but it's true. We had someone from Atlassian on stage earlier before. Mm-hmm. When we were in high school, one of the first things that we saw on the front of a magazine were the Atlassian boys with Nerf guns, and they'd just won a Microsoft contract. And we said, holy shit, there's someone from Sydney who could actually win a contract with Microsoft. And they started out of a garage as well. And so I think the important thing that all of us have to do, no matter what step we are along the journey, is to kind of provide that sort of, you can't be what you can't see, that role model for those that are one step behind us. I think that's really important.
Yeah, and I think it's really, really important for everyone in the audience to also realise you don't need to be that far ahead of someone else to be able to pay it forward. It's just a couple of inches ahead and you can help them save a whole lot of time.
That's right.
Yeah, I think that's really, really cool. And so just being the best company you can be, that's just really simple advice to get us all to be great role models.
And I think that's really, really important. If you become the biggest, baddest company you can be, the ecosystem will also benefit from that as well.
That's true. Now, I know that our title of our talk is actually called Beyond the Classroom, something, future education. Can we talk about we talked a little bit about these trends in employee engagement, but can I get you to maybe reflect on some of the new and emerging technology that you're seeing around the place and how that might start to impact learning and particularly online learning?
So I think, if I break down learning in general, people are seeing all the emergence of all this new technology, AI, VR, AR, all these different things that could be used in learning context. But one of the things I'm going to share with you from a personal point of view is how we best learn as human beings will not change, all right? If you go back to 200,000 years ago when, man emerged from caves, we learnt through story. If you go back to 2,000 years ago when you had a bit of a master and apprentice style system, you learnt from passing knowledge from one person to another. And today in lectures, you will have people passing knowledge from one person to many. So at the end of the day, you'll always have subject matter experts who will be passing their knowledge onto other people. The only thing that's going to change is the how. Mm-hmm. And for me, what it really comes down to is that how over time is going to be more personalised to the individual. We all learn differently. If you went to university, you'll find that person next to you will learn different to the way you did. So I think over time, we're actually going to find that people are going to have different ways to access the same kind of learning through different mediums, whether it be online, whether it be face-to-face, whether it be a mixture of both. But I think the other thing is that, as we mentioned right at the start, how we interact with technology and content, which I'd call it, in our day-to-day lives at home is going to start blending its way into the workforce as well. The only other thing I'd touch on is I also strongly believe that over time we'll see less of an emphasis on qualifications and more of an emphasis on skills. Because if I look at kind of my role as a doctor and why I work in sales in GoOne, I can't really transfer my qualification from one area to the other, but the skills that I've got, whether it be communication skills, problem-solving skills, they're highly transferable across a whole bunch of different roles. So what you will see will be the emergence of things like micro-credentials or nano-degrees, where instead of awarding someone a qualification, you're awarding them a nano-degree for a particular skill. And as an employer, that's what you start to look for, skills.
Absolutely. I mean, we saw Elon Musk tweet just 2 days ago that he's hiring his new AI team. He doesn't care about the fact that they've got a high school diploma or a degree. He just wants to see evidence of excellence. And I think that's kind of a really, that's a nice encapsulation of what we're looking for. And we talked to you, I think, the other day about this kaleidoscope of skills. I think there was an excellent talk from Vice. Did anyone go to the Vice talk? where she mentioned it's not just that millennials have this pie chart of skills that we have, but the baby Zoomers and the alphas coming through, they've kind of got this kaleidoscope and layers of different skills and different things they're going to be. They're going to be 600 things all at the same time.
Yep.
And I think, how do you think Go One is positioning education and learning for that generation?
I think what's really important is making sure that we understand where people's sort of, I guess, the way that they consume content is coming from, and being able to adapt what we're trying to deliver to them accordingly. AR and VR as an example, AI, and VR as an example, we're going to have a whole generation of people come through where artificial intelligence is going to be one of the key things that will drive what they do day to day. We're going to have virtual reality and augmented reality be key ways that they engage with content. So making sure that for us as an example that we have a marketplace of content where we have providers coming through with that is going to be incredibly important.
I'm seeing a future where people are going to be choosing whether they want to get their content from a lecturer, or it's a 3D bunny like we heard from Devon from Google yesterday, or maybe it's going to be a podcast. I'm already seeing lecturers at leading universities at Monash and others recording podcasts and doing bits and pieces, just testing all sorts of different content. So
I think those different media are really important. I learn more from books and podcasts than I do from courses. So through Go One, we actually provide people with budgets, and this is our customers now will be able to have that, where you'll be able to assign a budget to your employee and they can spend it on Eventbrite tickets, or they could spend it on books, or they could spend it on an online course. Giving employees choice is going to be one of the key things that's going to happen in the future. That's going to be very important.
We're going to hyper-personalise our learning. Now, we have a couple of minutes left. I'm going to ask you to go back in time and talk to Andrew, Chris and yourself back in that garage at Brisbane. What advice would you give the boys and what advice would you give people creating something new for the world in this room?
I think I know again, I'm throwing cliches out there left, right and centre.
You guys are catching them, right? You're catching the cliches, taking it up?
Back yourself. You've got you've got more to lose by not trying than you do from failing. And I think that's one of the things I think we could have gone harder and faster.
Really?
In all honesty, I think
this is not hard and fast enough.
I just look at it going, we took investment, our Series A we found was significant validation. Getting our Series B from Microsoft was great validation. But the thing that it comes back to is if I kind of could go back in time, I'd say, you don't need that sort of validation to be able to kind of back yourself to do things. Don't worry, the money, don't get me wrong, getting investment is great. Money is very important to grow a business. But I think one of the things that kind of slows you down the most is actually hesitating. And I'd like to hesitate a lot less if I could go back in time.